Mr. Jordash, before we continue, how much time would you need to explain what you wanted to submit in addition to? I mean, we have got 2.5 hours for the Simatović defense left. Both defense and prosecution are 2 hours, which makes 4.5 hours. We have 1 hour left today. That means 3.5 hours. Tomorrow it would just fit in, unless we have lengthy submissions about the matters you want to raise. And I'm also, of course, looking at Mr. Koen.
I don't think any more than 10 to 15 minutes maximum.
Well, if both parties then be running out of time, then we would have to continue on Friday.
Well, I will limit my submissions to 5 minutes, if that is.
For 5 minutes, Mr. Koen.
I think I can address my concerns in 5 minutes, Your Honor.
Okay, then it's a tight schedule now. When would you like to do that?
Are you on this convenient? Or?
Are you ready to, Mr. Koen, to...
Anytime the court wishes me to do it.
Then I'll be very sharp as far as time is concerned, but we'll start hearing you immediately. Mr. Jordash, you have 5 minutes. That means until 4 minutes past 6.
It would help if Your Honour saw it, but I know the prosecution object to that, so I'll try and do it without. When we went through the prosecution brief, we noted a number of problems ranging from citations which were not accurate, just simple errors which we wanted to correct. We also noted citations which purport to provide corroborative evidence which did not. Problems with relying upon evidence which was not corroborated, which had to be 92 kata evidence, where the prosecution hadn't assisted Your Honours in identifying what they say could corroborate. Citations to evidence which simply wasn't there. And we took the view that there were certain problems which we were duty-bound to raise and to put into a document which we felt would assist Your Honours and your legal officers in expediting the process of assessing the prosecution's closing brief and assisting Your Honours in the ascertainment of the truth. What we did was we identified the problems and then went through those problems and removed those problems which we felt amounted to fresh advocacy and limited our comments or corrections to those which we felt that if we didn't, there was a possibility that errors in the assessment of evidence might be made. So we took what we felt was a narrow approach, mindful that it wouldn't be fair to make new submissions, but mindful that we had an obligation to our client to ensure that Your Honours were not misled, intentionally or otherwise. And so this is what we put together. It is designed to assist Your Honours. It's not designed to make fresh points, but designed to, in the same way the prosecution did yesterday, correcting misleading error in our brief. We took the same view, but there were many more, and we felt we had to put together a document and offer it to Your Honours as helpful indications which would expedite the trial and create the conditions for the accurate assessment of the evidence and the ascertainment of the truth, and that's what we have now. We don't think it takes advantage of the prosecution. It, in fact, assists everybody to be looking at the evidence in a way which is fair and a way which is accurate. And that's why we propose that Your Honour should look at it, so that your legal officers can look at it and see if we're right. The alternative, of course, is that your legal officers start from fresh and have to do exactly the analysis which we did, identify the same errors, and in the end come to the same place. Those are my submissions.
Mr. Green.
Your Honor, 2 hours before the defense closing submissions began, I received this document. It's a lengthy document, and it contains argument. To give one example from the first page, it purports to contradict a statement made in the prosecution trial brief suggesting that Mr. Stanišić met Mr. Babić approximately 3 times. It says, quote, Stanišić stated that he was with that man over there at Babić's. However, about 2 other meetings, it is not clear whether they took place or not, as he says that Babić must come here for a while and then we will go there, unquote. Clearly argument. Your Honor, our understanding of the closing submissions in this case is that the Chamber has allowed lengthy written submissions, has extended the word limit substantially, and these oral submissions today, which were meant to amplify the written submissions as well as respond to the other parties' written submissions. Your Honors, a similar situation arose in the appeal hearing in the Stanišić case. In that case, at the beginning of the appeals hearing, the Stanišić defense handed out a large document, and this is how they characterized their document. This is all evidence that's been admitted. There are some issues that we believe that the trial chamber erred and misquoted statements from various witnesses, so we provide what we think is an objective view of that testimony, not taken out of context, unquote. Not dissimilar from what Mr. Jordash has just said. The appeals chamber said the following. I think that the prosecution should have been provided these volumes in advance, should have been able to peruse them, should have been able to in fact agree with you that it does not contain any new arguments. But in any event, it seems to me that this might be seen as an attempt to expand on the number of pages, etc., which have been presented in the appeals brief. The task of the defense, as it was the task of the prosecution, is to present its principal arguments in the briefs, which we have carefully studied, and to supplement this today by the oral hearings. And I do believe that we should not now agree to accept additional books. If my colleagues agree with me, kindly refrain from alluding to those briefs. May I ask the registrar to collect these volumes and to return them to the defense. Your Honor, that was on the 5th of October in 2005 at page 185. The prosecution requests Your Honors decline to accept these additional written submissions, or in the alternative, set a schedule and word limits for reply briefs so that the prosecution has an equal opportunity in these closing submissions. Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Jordash, 1 minute.
Thank you. Your Honours,
one question first. How many pages are we talking about? Is that the booklet which you have in your hand? It is 40 to 80 pages? 82 pages.
But it's not submissions. It's, let me just, number 364, error, 92 kata evidence requires corroboration. That's a reference to Stanišić and deputies Tabaučević and Prodanić met regularly, relying upon a Rule 92 kata witness, but no corroborative evidence identified. So, and then just flicking through again. 207, error number 207, relating to paragraph 565, assertion on the 12th of July 1992, the Red Berets and other forces killed 27 non-Serb civilians in Perchin's disco. Our comment, reference is incorrect as it only describes the list of victims. That the Red Berets were part of this attack is left without reference. It's pointing out obvious things such as that.
chamber denies the admission of the submission of such a document. However, of course, the parties are invited, if there's any reference in the submissions by the prosecution to non-existing evidence, of course, it would assist the chamber. But Mr. Groom, I take it that if the evidence does not exist, that you would come immediately to the chamber and say there's a mistake or something like that. The same for clear errors, typos in quotations. If that is, but I can't imagine that you fill 80 pages with that. Then, of course, I take it you will have a look at it, and then, together with the defense, come to the chamber's assistance and correct it. But as far as that is concerned, you can seek agreement in order to assist the chamber together, and otherwise it is denied to be submitted. And Mr. Jordas, I think it would have been wise to raise the matter at an earlier stage. Also, with the prosecution would have had better chances to achieve what you apparently wish to achieve.
To be honest, it just took a long time to check. And
yes, but have you at all started any talks with the prosecution about it at any earlier stage?
No.
No. Well, then you have taken that risk, and it's. But to the extent the parties could agree on typos or that kind of things, for example, if the word in the quote is "was" and it actually is, then of course I would think that you would agree on that, and together assist the chamber. And the same is true for non-existing evidence. We would not long search for evidence which doesn't exist, because if the source is quoted and if it's not found anywhere, then we'll assume that it doesn't exist anyhow. But it seems that it goes in 80 pages far further, and that is one of the reasons why the chamber considers that it should not be accepted. This took already 30 minutes. Mr. Makac, if you start quickly, we'll not lose further time. Not to say that it was lost time, that we'll not spend more time on the matters and hear your closing argument. Mr. Makac, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good evening to everyone in and around the courtroom. In the entire course of these proceedings, and also in their final trial brief and closing arguments, the prosecution maintained that the JCE was conceived for the purpose to permanently remove the non-Serb population by the use of force from large areas in Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, and that during that campaign of persecution, Franko Simatović was one of the more prominent members of the State Security Service of the Republic of Serbia. The prosecution goes on to maintain that this plan originated not earlier than April 1991 and lasted until not later than December 1995. The prosecution designates Simatović as Stanišić's deputy and the operative commander of the units of the State Security Service, ignoring, I would say, a great deal of evidence that, to say the least, cast a doubt over such a conclusion. Proceeding from these premises, the prosecution alleges that Simatović, occupying the said positions, planned and carried out the joint criminal enterprise together with the political leaders of the Serbs in Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, their governments, military and police officials, as well as political, military, and police leaders of the Republic of Serbia. In their final trial brief, however, the prosecution states that beginning with summer 1990, started to assist and advise JC members in the two Serbian autonomous regions in Croatia. The prosecution also alleges that beginning with summer 1991, JC members, including the unit that belonged to the DB of Serbia, the Red Berets, as well as Arkan's Serbian Volunteers Guard, the SDG, intimidated and assaulted non-Serb population throughout Serbian autonomous regions in Croatia. The prosecution claims that this pattern from Croatia was applied also in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and that the JC members formed parallel institutions and forces in order to carry out a violent campaign of persecution in the way they had begun in Croatia. The main piece of evidence on which the prosecution relies for all these allegations is the speech read out by Simatović before Chief Stanišić, President Milošević, and other officials at the ceremony in Kula in 1997. Although the evidence that has been led is in stark contrast with the content of the speech read out by Simatović, the prosecution relies on this speech as on a central piece of evidence in their case against Simatović, despite the fact that, as the defense maintains, the said speech was delivered under particular circumstances and for particular reasons that we will address in due course. It is obvious that after the conclusion of the Dayton Accords in November 1995, the State Security Service of Serbia had particular reasons to present to President Milošević its own role in the conflicts in the former Yugoslavia in a different light. There is a wealth of evidence that we will shortly emphasize to prove that the assertions made in this speech are inaccurate, exaggerating the role of the RDB of Serbia. To quote an example, the speech refers to 26 locations, allegedly training camps. In these proceedings, we had occasion to hear of only several locations where training centers were allegedly established. The same can be said of the reference to 50 locations where the unit allegedly participated in combat operations, as well as the reference to 5,000 unit members who participated in the fighting. After more than 3 years of hearing a large number of witnesses and considering all the evidence led, I don't think anyone in this courtroom could count more than 5 locations with which the Unit for Anti-Terrorist Operations of the State Security Service of Serbia could be associated, or where they could possibly have been involved in some operations. The number of 5,000 unit members is absurd in itself and is deeply discrepant with all the evidence. One glaring example of such exaggeration are allegations about the so-called air squadron, which the key witness of the prosecution, Milovanović, qualified as inaccurate, and the same applies to the airport used by these alleged aircraft. It is a fact that Franko Simatović, when reading the speech, whose author we do not know, uses the word "we." But that fact does not mean that he was directly or in any other way involved from the very beginning in all the alleged activities of the service. Simatović is not a synonym for the service, nor is the service a synonym for Simatović. Whichever employee of the State Security Service of Serbia read out that speech instead of him, he would have had to use the word "we." The defense believes that the prosecution was required to lead specific evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the concrete participation of Simatović for every one of these allegations if they treat this speech as crown evidence of Simatovic's participation and responsibility. We will further address the most striking evidence that enables the defense to state that the prosecution failed to prove Simatovic's criminal responsibility beyond a reasonable doubt. The prosecution claims that Simatovic's speech is an admission and testimony about the events by a direct participant. We believe, after considering the entire body of facts, that the speech does not corroborate the allegations and is not consistent with the evidence and constitutes an exaggerated picture of the State Security Service and its role. The prosecution claims that Simatović armed, controlled and commanded some of the direct perpetrators. It is also claimed that material, logistical and intelligence support was provided by him to implement the planned JCE. It is claimed also that Milosevic in 1994 estimated that the provided equipment and weapons are in the value of $1 billion. If indeed the supplied assistance was worth more than $1 billion, it is unclear from the evidence led by the prosecution what specific influence and contribution Franco Simatović had in supplying that money or part of that money. What kind of decision Simatović made? Whom did he consult? Who informed him? What type of assistance will be extended and in what amount? Which part of that $1 billion was supplied by Simatović? How much of that assistance can be connected with Simatović in any way? Is that $1,000? $100,000? Is there any evidence of that in this case? Is there any proof? Is there any proof as to what assistance is associated with the DB? What is state assistance? What is JNA assistance? What is assistance from the Army of Yugoslavia? Where exactly is the position of Franco Simatović in the decision to extend this assistance to the population, to the Serbian population outside of Serbia, if any? What is his role in the decision-making about providing this assistance? What is the extent of his contribution? There is no evidence of that. There is, however, strong proof that Simatović had no influence on any possible decisions and any possible assistance to anyone. The prosecution tries to identify Simatović with the service or the state of Serbia. Which is absolutely inaccurate and unacceptable. The prosecution failed to present to this trial chamber the only relevant evidence, that is to say, evidence as to what and how much Simatović assisted in the implementation of the joint criminal enterprise, if he did so at all, and what is the importance and the consequences of his activities. It is the position of the defense that the prosecution was required to point out precisely the specific contribution of Simatović as a member of the JCE and the extent of his contribution. With all due respect, the prosecution has failed to do that. In the final trial brief, the prosecution refers to an integrated network of secret training camps run allegedly by the accused. There is nothing to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the accused set up and ran an integrated network of secret training camps and ran them. First of all, the prosecution failed to show what this integrated network of camps consists of. What is it? What is that structure of control or any other element that makes these camps integrated? Thus, for instance, the camp on Mount Tara was established on the orders of Radovan Stojčić Bađa for the advanced training of PJP members. That camp was in no way secret. PJP from the public security sector were trained there. There is evidence of that, and we have heard numerous witnesses testifying to that, as we pointed out in our final trial brief. The camp in Golubic was not set up either by Stanišić or Simatović, nor was it in any way secret or concealed. Golubic existed for several months before the arrival of Captain Dragan in Knin, and the training in Golubic was followed by both domestic and foreign media. Further on, we will deal with these allegations in greater detail. Even if the JC existed with the objective alleged by the prosecution failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Simatović participated in that enterprise. The prosecution did indeed enumerate a large number of persons who allegedly were involved in the JCE, but failed to prove the existence of any connection or interaction of Simatović with a large number of these persons who are said to be JC members. Concerning the persons that Simatović did have some connection with, the prosecution failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Simatović voluntarily shared the alleged common intent that was the purpose of the JCE. We say that the prosecution did not provide a single piece of evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Franko Simatović had any contact with Slobodan Milošević, first of all, who is considered as the principal JC member, before 1997 at the ceremony in Kula, where President Milošević was present and when there was absolutely no contact between him and Simatović. Furthermore, there is no evidence provided by the prosecution of any Simatovic's particular contacts with Kadijević, Radmilo Bogdanović, Goran Hadžić, Blagoje Adžić, Radovan Stojičić Bađa, Biljana Plavšić, Momčilo Krajišnik, Mića Stanišić, or Šešelj. All that the prosecution offers as evidence that Simatović was part of the joint criminal enterprise are two photographs, two entries from the Mladić's diary, and two intercepts with the unsubstantiated and vague theory on the quote-unquote close relationship between Simatović and Stanišić. The Simatović defense will first of all deal with what the prosecution calls quote-unquote close relationship between Simatović and Stanišić. The prosecution does not explain the exact distinction that characterizes the official relationship between the chief of the service and one of the employees of the service, and where and how their relationship turns into a close one. It is true and it is normal that there was cooperation, as there had to be, between the chief and his employee, who later on becomes his advisor. However, the boundary of cooperation, as envisaged by the rules of the service, was never crossed. nor did the prosecution offer any evidence that the relationship between Stanišić and Simatović went beyond the rules that both of them had to observe. As regards the said two photographs that the prosecution refers to in their final trial brief, the defense kindly asked the trial chamber that these two photographs, P390 and P391, be compared with photograph P3043, which has been indisputably established to have been made at the time of the liberation of hostages in Bosnia in 1994. It is perfectly clear that these two photographs were made at the same time, on the same occasion. The defense has offered to the trial chamber a photograph of Franco Simatović from spring 1993, where it is clearly seen that Franco Simatović looks completely different and still wears no glasses. That is Exhibit D 862, to which we draw your attention. The statement of witness Milovanović that he thinks that the photograph P390 was made in Belgrade cannot be relied on as evidence, because it is obvious that Milovanović is only guessing. So much about photographs. As regards the entries in Ratko Mladić's diary,
just in order to fully understand, where you said it is perfectly clear that these two photographs were made at the same time on the same occasion. Did you intend to say that P390 and P391 were made at the same time and at the same occasion as P3043? Is that what you intended to say?
Yes, Your Honor. When I say at the same time, I should have said at or around the same time.
What my concern was is you said these two photographs, but what you are doing is you are comparing two photographs with a third one. And apparently you want to say that they are made at the same time approximately as the other one. Now I'm still a bit puzzled by your last observation. If you say it's approximately the same time, could that then be the same occasion? Because for me an occasion is limited in time. You said at the same time on the same occasion, isn't it?
Your Honors, yes, and it is the submission of the defense that the negotiations on the liberation of hostages took a while, and these photographs were made at the time of the negotiations to liberate the hostages.
Yes, not necessarily at the same occasion, that is the negotiations to liberate the hostages, or was it at those negotiations that the two photographs were taken? Perhaps you reread my questions and we'll then further hear from you.
Your Honors, it is our submission that they were made during the negotiations. That is what we assert.
Yes, then that's clear.
Što se
As regards Mladić and his diaries, the defense should like to remind the trial chamber that Mladić kept them from 1991 through 1996. In all this time, Mladić noted hundreds of meetings involving a large number of persons, including many meetings with the alleged members of the joint criminal enterprise. In the more than 5 years, while Mladić was noting down all these meetings, he noted Simatovic's presence at some of these meetings only twice. However, in both these cases, Simatović did not participate in the talks at all. In addition, the defense wishes to draw the trial chamber's attention to the fact that the first entry, dated 28 February 1993, is an entry related to the Operation Udar strike that we will deal with shortly. The second entry, P2541, dated 9 September 1995, is an entry from a meeting of General Mladić, General Perisic, and Jovica Stanišić, attended also by Franko Simatović. The only person who doesn't speak at the meeting is Franko Simatović. Also telling, if you look at this entry in its entirety, is that this meeting is about the liberation of 2 foreign pilots, and that was the only topic discussed there.
Dakle, 2 sastanka.
Thus, we have 2 meetings. No contribution to the discussion. 1 meeting dealing with the liberation of 2 foreign pilots. We will provide further explanation of the second meeting shortly. As regards the intercepts, the defense would like to draw the trial chamber's attention to the following. The first intercept mentioning Simatović is P693. In paragraph 117 of their final trial brief, the prosecution quotes only the end of this conversation. In order to gain a real picture of this conversation, one has to take into account the whole. One essential thing about this conversation is that it happened by chance. Simatović just happened to be at the office of Mihail Kertes at the time when he got a call from President Karadzic. If you take a close look at this intercept, you will see that Karadzic obviously does not recognize Simatovic's voice. That Kertes tells Karadzic that a friend wants to hear him, which is obvious from the BCS transcript of this intercept. The content of this conversation between Simatović and Karadzic does not allow us to make any conclusions about the topic of the conversation. It is also important to note that Simatović and Karadzic are not on first-name terms, and it's also clear that Karadzic does not recognize Simatovic's voice. Simatović first introduces himself to Karadzic. Any conclusion beyond a reasonable doubt as to the topic of this conversation and the nature of the relationship between Simatović and Karadzic based on this conversation is absolutely impossible. It is only possible to speculate, and that is precisely what the prosecution does in their final brief. The second intercept, P671, shows absolutely nothing. This intercept relates to the intercepted conversation between Jovica Stanišić, then Chief of the State Security Service of Serbia, with Karadzic. And in that conversation, Stanišić says, "You have greetings from Frankie and the captain." End quote. First of all, this quote does not prove anything, does not show anything. It does not show any connection between Simatović and Karadzic, except that perhaps they know each other. We don't even know who the captain at that office is. That is what the prosecution offers us as essential, strong proof that Franko Simatović has a special and a close relationship with a large number of JCE members. We do not believe that this evidence could be sufficient to any reasonable trier of fact to make such a conclusion. In addition, the prosecution failed to prove the other second cumulative element of JCE that would prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Simatović was part of a common plan with a clearly defined role of his own in that plan. Another standard accepted before this tribunal, and another thing that the prosecution has to prove. As for the mental elements of JCE, the defense emphasizes that in this case file there is no direct evidence on Simatovic's state of mind. The only piece of evidence that contains something relevant to what we could call Simatovic's state of mind is his own statement concerning the speech in Kula. Is his speech in Kula? However, that is a speech that Simatović only read out on behalf of the service, on behalf of the State Security Service of Serbia, with all the shortcomings that we have already addressed and described in greater detail in our brief. That evidence on the existence of JCE and Simatovic's participation in it is unreliable and insufficient to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt is also obvious from the examples uses to corroborate their allegations in their final brief. We have no doubt that the trial chamber shall consider all of the evidence presented by both the prosecution and the defense in a detailed way and in all its aspects. We only wish to point out here to some examples of misinterpretation of evidence by the prosecution and their reliance on evidence of little or no probative value. or evidence that is insufficient to prove the prosecution theory beyond a reasonable doubt. When analyzing the implementation of JC in SA Ukraina, the prosecution relies heavily on the testimony of witness Babic, who testified in the Milosevic case, and whose testimony the defense of Franko Simatović never had an occasion to test through cross-examination. This witness assesses the role and participation of Simatović in the events of the summer of 1991 in a very superficial and generalized way in P 1878. From the evidence offered by the prosecution, it is completely impossible to see the specific role of Simatović in setting up the police stations in Kraina. The defense had no opportunity to examine the witness on this issue, which strips this evidence of all its probative value. Furthermore, the prosecution claims that in January 1991, Martic agreed with Bogdanović and Stanišić about the provision of material, technical, and monetary assistance to Kraina, wherein Simatović would supply salaries, uniforms, and equipment for special police. Maintaining this allegation, the prosecution invokes the testimony of JF 039. At this point, Your Honours, could we move into private session?
We move into private session.
Where is your open session? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Registrar. We adjourn for the day, and we will resume tomorrow, Thursday, the 31st of January, at 2:15 in the afternoon, in the same courtroom. 3.
All rise, we will arrest.